I would like to welcome all participants of our conference, firstly informing that I would like to congratulate to Dr. John Mitzgiel, visiting professor at the University of Warsaw, who since 3 years is the Warsaw East European Conference Director, the best director of Warsaw East European Conference. We have only some outstanding speakers. It will be a topic of Professor Mitzgiel speech, but first of all, I would like to really cordially welcome our special guest, Mr. Marcin Przydacz, Vice Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland, personally specialist, and in the ministry, specialist of Eastern Studies. Not Eastern Studies, but Polish Eastern Policy. Dear Minister, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. It's a great honor to be here. Usually I was sitting somewhere there, and this is the first possibility to be here in this capacity. I mean, being Undersecretary of State at the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'd like to apologize for being late. I was just invited by Mr. Czaputowicz, and I couldn't, of course, leave without his permission, since he is my boss. So, Excellencies, Magnificences, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the conference, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this opening of the consecutive already 16th Warsaw East European Conference. This event, gathering each year scholars, analysts, politicians, students, all those deeply engaged in shaping the political reality of today, has become already a landmark in the political calendar, not only of Warsaw, I'd say, but the whole Poland. I would like to pay a special tribute to Director Jan Malicki, who inaugurated this initiative back in 2004. Without his personal efforts, of course not limited only to this chain of conferences, the intellectual cycles of people interested in Russia, East European and Central Asian matters in Poland would look much poorer, of course. So let me now start the discussion about the Eastern policy. Troubles or triumph at the eastern part of Europe and the Central Asia? The answer is quite simple, I would say, but a bit banal, I would say. Both. I mean, the fate of Eastern Europe and the whole post-Soviet space of the last 30 years provide us with a number of examples of conflicts and fewer, but still present cases of success, unfortunately born in a huge effort. In my opinion, the very term post-Soviet space, it's not really adequate to describe the present day geographical and political area spanning from Lviv in western Ukraine to Vladivostok in the Russian Far East. There's a whole generation of young people, my peers actually, who do not remember the Soviet times. I don't remember the communist time in Poland. I was born at the very end of that period, and the whole generation already, as you may see, living right now in this region, they do not remember the Soviet times and the communist times. So They started their families, they started their business, their political career already in a new reality, and we have to take it also into our consideration. During the last 3 decades, the countries of the former Soviet Union went different ways, deciding on their internal processes and relations with the foreign partners. Some of them were able to overcome the past and build with all the existing problems a democratic system and introduce elements of free market economy. In some of them, unfortunately, autocratic tendencies won, and the domestic economy is under control of few oligarchs. To overcome the past, countries of the Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asia decided to revive their national cultures, to build their statehood and national identities. In some cases, these processes resulted into conflicts with the neighbors, but in general, and from the very beginning, makers of the Polish foreign policy. Foreign policy towards the partner region is based both on values and interests. We strive to support their sovereignty, deepen their ties with the European and Euro-Atlantic family, and develop bilateral relations based on our national interests. That was the policy pursued by the late President Lech Kaczynski, who, as we all remember, decided to stand in Tbilisi together with several leaders from the region in August 2008 to support Georgia fighting the Russian aggression. By the way, right now Georgia and their society also needs our support. Both values and interests were the base for the Eastern Partnership. The policy of the European Union toward the 6 countries of Eastern Europe and Southern Caucasus, proposed by Poland and Sweden 10 years ago. This policy brought very positive results and is being actively developed by the current government. I think it's a great success. It's also thanks to the Eastern Partnership we could achieve all those DCFTAs, visa-free regimes, and other instruments which brought, at least at this very moment, 3 countries, Georgia, Ukraine and Moldova, a bit closer to our Euro and Euro-Atlantic family. On the other hand, we need to be vigilant and wary of the actions of Russian federations, which pose constant threats to the international order. Russia continues creeping annexation of parts of Donbas and further violates the Minsk agreements. A few months ago, we discussed the crisis in Kerch Straits. Right now, we have to deal with so-called passportization of Donbas inhabitants. This is not only about challenging new president in Ukraine, and definitely not about Donbas citizens traveling to Europe. This is about creating a long-term problem, about creating conditions to use the so-called Russian minorities in neighboring countries to influence their foreign policy or to justify potential military aggression. Russia's activities against Ukrainian sovereignty should be seen in a broader context of Russian hybrid warfare that is waged against East European countries, the EU and its member states. They are directed against the cohesion of our societies and the very democratic institutions that are the backbone of our countries, and as such must be strongly opposed. We do it through active promotion of strengthening of sanctions, developing our national and EU-level system of fight against disinformation, and constant raising the issue of Russia's aggressive policy at all possible international fora. During the period 2018-2019, we focused particularly, we as Poland, on the UN Security Council, where we enjoy the status of non-permanent member. But at the same time, we maintain our high levels of activity in NATO, OSCE, and the European Union. All this goes hand in hand with our constant strong support for the civil society in East European countries and Russia. I want to emphasize that, and Russia, because our critical assessment of the nature of Russian foreign policy is not equivalent to the condemnation of Russian nation as a whole. We actively support Russian human rights defenders and civil rights activists, both bilaterally and by developing EU policies in the form of guidelines in this respect. No policy could be successful without the solid background of knowledge and analysis. This is being provided by you all here, scholars, representatives of think tanks, specialists of a wide range of topics related to this disappearing post-Soviet space. Thanks to you, we can draw the lines of policy in practice with a high level of awareness and self-confidence. And thank you very much for that. I wish all of you successful and fruitful debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Some of you may have noticed in the papers recently that the first Ukrainian unit to receive certification from NATO to participate in rapid reaction forces happened this week, which is a step forward for the Ukrainian military. And that topic, not just the certificate and that unit, but the topic of the Ukrainians eventually cooperating with NATO more closely is the topic of our first and keynote speech this morning by Andrzej Falkowski, a lieutenant general who's retired from the Ministry of Defense. I'm happy to say a doctor of economics, former Polish military representative to the NATO and EU military committees in Brussels between 2014 and 2018, deputy chief of the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces in 2013-2014, defense, military, naval, and air attaché in Washington, D.C. Between 2011 and 2013, director of the Logistics and Resources Division of the NATO International Military Staff in Brussels between 2008 and 2013, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I'm very happy that we can have a little bit of current information on what's going on in the area of Ukrainian-NATO cooperation. And I invite General Falkowski to come to the podium.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for invitation. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for hunting me down and dragging out of the retirement misery to even more misery of post-Soviet space after 30 years. My presentation, as you can see in the program, is going to be about NATO and Ukraine, each other, influencing each other, but of course talking about Ukraine and NATO, we cannot forget about Russia. NATO was always about Russia. As a matter of fact, first about Soviet Union. Roughly, we can distinguish three periods in NATO's history. First, 40 years, very simple bipolar world, very well-known enemy, both sides, no complications whatsoever. Next 20 years, NATO went through kind of identity crisis. We went to the non-Article 5 operations. We were preparing for war of choice rather than war of necessity because there was no Warsaw Pact anymore. And some static infrastructure was disbanded. Instead, we were building deployable capability like there is heaven and peace around. Last about 10 years, but speeding up in 5 years, we are back to the future. We are back to the roots of collective defense. We are back to the Article 5. What were those 30 years in Eastern and Central Europe? The rules of the game have changed also roughly 3 times. First time after the Cold War, when there was the chance to create ground for friendly relations and trust. Then the second set of the rules came with the NATO enlargement and European Union enlargement. Most countries of the region became the NATO or European Union members, and decisions of NATO or European Union were significantly affected by the region and for the region. And finally, rules of the game in the region have changed 5 years ago. Also, Mediterranean was influenced by the events in the south. 5 years ago, we had the unprecedented military actions Russian military actions in Ukraine, a little bit earlier in 2008 in Georgia, but that was not yet the wake-up call for NATO. So what is Russia doing? Russia is the source of regional instability with their grab and deter strategy, and the policy, what is ours, what is yours is negotiable. Russia has grabbed the east of Ukraine and Crimea, and at the moment Crimea is kind of bargaining chip. They are exercising sanctuarization of that region, like sanctuarization of Kaliningrad as well. As one of our politicians said in the past, the only secure and safe border is when the Russian soldiers are on both sides. Russians are perfect in diplomacy. But what kind of diplomacy is this? Air diplomacy, gunboat diplomacy, heavy metal diplomacy, generally coercive diplomacy. Air diplomacy, you can observe those strategic bombers raids here and there. You can observe clonery of the fighters or jinx, very dangerous for the other armed forces, because as a matter of fact they don't know whether they were attacked or they should defend themselves. Gunboat, the best example is Kerch situation. And heavy metal, all the time flexing muscles, organizing the exercises close to NATO borders, and even threatening neighboring countries with the usage of tactical nuclear weapon. Russia, comparing to NATO countries, has rapid decision-making process. In NATO, as you know, we have to have consensus-based decisions. 29 countries have to agree on any decision, soon 30 countries. Putin doesn't have such a limitation. In Russia, practically there is no opposition. People are still Homo Sovieticus in mind, and public opinion can accept, can bear all the burden and huge losses. They are exercising active disinformation against countries and against forces like enhanced forward presence forces. Everything in order to get back control over public opinion or to get back to the negotiating table. Putin gambles with the West. Putin gambles with us. He's undermining the post-Cold War international order. Russia has very limited positive agenda, but has the potential to destabilize and to help the war instrument. Russia has dominated Eastern Europe security challenge. It is the fake democracy with no real dispute and dialogue. Its external policy is the way to cover internal problems. I could elaborate forever on this topic because I'm on the list from 2015 with the ban from entering Russia among 89 Europeans and 18 Poles. So they probably know my opinion about themselves. What is very dangerous here is unpredictability of the Russian military actions. It has become challenge. Russian strategic posture seems to be very much long-term. What is the NATO reaction to that? As a matter of fact, 3 last summits were devoted to Russian aggressive behavior. In 2008, we have Russo-Georgia war, but that was not enough for NATO wake-up. In Strasbourg-Hell summit in 2009, a year later, NATO decided to allow Russia to the negotiating table. Very, very tricky situation. Let me start very shortly with the first summit devoted very much to the Russian aggressive action. Wales summit. I had the pleasure to attend this summit and to prepare that summit because those days I was the military representative to NATO as well. Wales summit was supposed to be a routine summit summarizing the Afghanistan mission. Couple of months earlier, Ukraine predicament started, and all the agenda was changed and subordinated to that. That was very difficult after the so-called period of strategic pause in the region. But we were successful to introduce first shy changes in NATO modus operandi. Why shy? Because nobody wanted those days to irritate the bear in the east. So readiness action plan was established, graduated response plan, very high readiness joint task force, NATO force integration units, and hybrid war was defined for the first time. A readiness level of some of the corps of NATO were raised. What was the significance of that summit? Wales gave the leeway, proper latitude to the further changes, those in Warsaw. That started the mental transformation in the NATO's way of thinking after this so-called strategic pause. Now we have 2 years later, we have the Warsaw Summit. Somebody can ask why it's so often. Summits is supposed to bring some key issues, strategic, and strategy is not for 2 years, but the situation was so dynamic, and summits itself are having kind of deterrence factor included in itself. So development of decisions pre-signaled in Wales happened in Warsaw. Strengthening the eastern flank became the fact. Enhanced forward presence, tailored forward presence, multinational division northeast was created, multinational brigade southeast was created in Romania. ABCT, ABC Armed Brigade Combat Team, 9-month rotation in the region by the US forces. Operational readiness of the anti-missile defense was announced, and cyber domain was established as a 5th operational domain, because everybody came to the conclusion that this is as dangerous as air, land, and maritime, and also the space. Now, we have the Brussels next 2 years. We have new US President, Trump, and further implementation and adaptation of the alliance to respond to 21st century threats. Main achievement, 4 times 30, which is 30 days, 30 maneuverable battalions, 30 ships, 30